Hello everyone, I'm Trish Lynch from IOHR TV. Today we've taken NGO Focus on the road from London to the beautiful Queen's Palace right here in Copenhagen in Denmark. Denmark has experienced attacks and halted terror plots firsthand. We know that 150 people have left the country since 2012 to join terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq. But Denmark has also experienced left and right-wing extremism. Waiting for us in the studio today is Henrik Bjelke Hansen, Director of the Preventive Security Department at PET, the Danish Security Intelligence Service that identify, investigate and prevent different forms of extremism and terrorism in the country. Mr. Hansen, good to have you with us. Thank you. Now, IOHR has been following the work closely of the PREVENT programme in Denmark, which I think, it has to be said, it's a beacon, it's a model for all to follow. Tell me, if you would, more about your prevention work.
Thank you for having me, Trish. Well, it's an old programme. We have a long and proud crime preventive history in Denmark. So with the early stages of the formation of violent extremist groups, Al-Qaeda and so on, it was natural for us to look into PREVENT as not only something that is on the side, but as an integrated part of how we deal with radicalization and violent extremism. So that was sort of the history of it. Obviously, we've been developing our programs and our initiatives over the years. We had our first government action plan in 2007, as I recall. And basically, it is divided into, it's a whole of government approach, and it's been so from the beginning. So civil society, public authorities, and the Danish Security and Intelligence Service are involved. And basically, from our perspective, we have three categories of interventions, or three categories of initiatives. The first of which is to engage with civil society. It's imperative that civil society is involved in the early stages of prevention. Civil society is where, people are radicalized in our communities, they attend our schools, they go to our football clubs and so on and so forth. Second part of our initiatives is to build capacities and share knowledge with professionals. And this is sort of the backbone of the Danish model. It is that professionals, which have a responsibility towards youth in particular, have the capacities to detect and address radicalization. And actually, the earlier they are able to identify and put in place preventive measures, the more successful we are. Our job is to make sure that they have those capacities and to advise them so that they're able to detect and also address and obviously report cases of radicalization. Third category is more on exit and rehabilitation, and that is obviously directed towards individuals who are already radicalized, already part of a violent extremist group, and to offer them a way out.
The terror threat is significant in Denmark at the moment. Tell me, what's the nature of the kind of threats that you have been monitoring and that you've been trying to prevent?
Yeah, it is significant and has been so for a while. It is in the center of the threat against Denmark is militant Islamism, and that is primarily Islamic State, but also still Al-Qaeda, inspired groups. And there are groups and individuals in Denmark who are ready to use violent means to, that is terrorist acts, to achieve their goals. But we also have political extremists, that is left-wing and right-wing extremist groups. And also in that category of threats, we have groups and individuals who are ready and able to use violence.
Can you say that Denmark is under threat because of its policies, joining the coalition against ISIS, but also because of the Danish cartoons crisis, which depicted the Prophet Muhammad as a terrorist?
Since there's a serious threat to Denmark, or significant threat to Denmark, some of the drivers are the cartoon crisis. And it's also one of the drivers that it, and our foreign policies and military engagements in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this is something that is frequently portrayed in for instance, the propaganda.
What can you tell me about right-wing extremism? Because all over the world, we see thousands of people taking to the streets. What can you tell me about the trend that we're seeing at the moment?
There is a threat from violent extremist groups, and that we do have individuals and groups in Denmark and in neighboring countries that are ready to use and able to use violent means to forward their political extremist views. On the prevent side, which is my job, I would say, again, don't develop different programs. Stick with what's working. So the programs that we know are working with the radicalization in its various forms throughout the last 10 years should also be tailored to right-wing extremists. So civil society, maybe different civil society organizations, but also in our schools and in our prisons and so on, and tailored disengagement programs.
It's quite unique, isn't it, that the intelligence apparatus is involved in the early stages of prevention. Tell me, if you would, what your role is in this.
Yes, it is quite unique. Our role, obviously, we are the National Security and Intelligence Service, and it's in our mandate to prevent threats against society. So we've taken that quite literally and engaged in prevent work. And we do so, as I said earlier, in different ways. So obviously we believe that it's imperative that we can help sensitize and activate civil society. But we also believe that the knowledge we have as an intelligence service should be translated into preventive measures. And that can be preventive measures undertaken by local authorities, police, schools, social services, psychiatric institutions, in prison and probation institutions.
So you need a joined up approach, don't you?
We need a
Everybody
joint
working
whole of
together.
government, but that is translating intelligence into advice and capacity building. But we also run our own disengagement program, which means that we are directly involved in hands-on activities.
In Denmark, most of the radicalized people tend to be young men. What are the main reasons that they become radicalized in the first place, and what can you do to prevent this radicalization in the first place?
Yes, you're right. There's still a dominance of young male but it has changed a lot. So particularly after the formation of Islamic State, we've seen a much broader picture of people who are radicalized. So we see also women. Yeah. We see younger generations than we've seen earlier, but also older generations. We also see a geographical expansion from primarily big cities, suburbs to different corners of the country. And that also, I believe, has to do with the spread of propaganda. So the possibilities for Islamic militant Islamist groups or political extremist groups to talk directly into the children's room through the internet.
Straight into their head.
Straight in, without all the defensive mechanisms that are in place in open society. In our assessment, the propaganda is particularly effective and towards young and marginalized, already vulnerable individuals. And we put in place a number of activities, both some of the traditional hard measures, takedown, referrals, increased our abilities to map extremist activities online, and then preventive measures. And this is one of the areas that we've been the most experimental in the last years, and have formed a national alliance against online radicalization that involves civil society organizations, local government authorities, and the Danish Security and Intelligence Service,
Now, as you've just said, there are many ways of accessing extremist content online, but according to your 2018 report, radicalization happens almost everywhere. In schools, as you said, in bars, in fact, it happens everywhere. Tell me more, if you would, about your findings in this report.
I think it's important to stress that there is no one radicalization process. The more people we look into, the more we see how diverse it is. Mm-hmm. And I think if you look into the pathways to other kinds of crimes, you'd see pretty much the same picture.
Would you say that social media has been a game changer when it comes to people becoming radicalized, that without the power of social media that the numbers would be significantly less?
I would not.
No.
I would not. I would say that radicalization is primarily a social process. And I would, and whether you socialize with peers, in this case radical peers, on or offline, it's the same basic factors and drivers. I would also say that that radicalization almost always shows. It's extremely difficult to sit completely isolated in your own little room and become radicalized without someone detecting it. And that's the good news. Whether those individuals detecting it are able to identify and address it is another matter.
So it's almost about training parents and friends to be able to spot the signs and then to act on it accordingly, isn't it?
Exactly. So whether you're radicalized in a mosque milieu or you're radicalized online, I believe that that's such a big identity changer that someone should be able to see it. Whether it's the parents or the school teacher or the local community elders is different from case to case.
We know that since 2012, 150 young men have left Denmark to join terrorist groups in Iraq and Syria. But it's not just men, it's also young women who many times take their young children with them. Now we know that quite a few have returned back to Denmark. What happens to returning fighters when they return home? Is there some form of de-radicalization program? What's the situation?
There's not I think that's a general comment, if I may first, is that we've built our de-radicalization programs and initiatives on existing crime preventive work. And it's really important for me to stress, because I think that's one of our main findings, is that don't try to build parallel systems just because the criminal code that they offend is different. But obviously, it's a case-by-case situation. I mean, we're talking 150 people who left and a relative few amounts of people who have returned and will return. And to build or to have effective de-radicalization programs, if you wish, or rehabilitation programs, we need to tailor them to the individual. And obviously it's very important whether that individual was a 16-year-old disillusioned boy or a 30-year-old hardliner who have been in battle, whether it's a young woman or it's a man. So, and whether they were part of an extremist group when they left that still exists, or they are re-entering to a new life.
What do the international community need to do to try and clamp down on this and spot the signs early and prevent, just like you're talking about?
Well, it's important that we keep doing what we're doing. I mean, it's 10, 15, 20 years. It's a relatively short period of time to develop effective programs. And we need, obviously, to keep developing our programs, keep tweaking them to be more effective. We need to learn from each other so that what's effective in, say, Sweden or France may be transported to other countries, because this is indeed a global problem. And then we need to share knowledge.
Mr. Hansen, thank you for sharing the incredible work that PET are doing in preventing terrorism and violent extremism. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of IOHR TV. Please feel free to share this episode with as many people as you can, because raising awareness and shouting it from the rooftops is what we do best. Until next time, from myself, Trish Lynch, goodbye.